very happy to have Patti Kerr today. She comes from New Jersey, all the way from New Jersey. And she wouldn't be here if it weren't for my staff, Leslie Markey, who had met her on a trip to New Jersey and said, oh, you should invite her up and give a talk. And it all worked out, so Patti's here. I'd also like to acknowledge Maggie Lewis, head of the Vermont chapter of the Alzheimer Association. So Patti is a certified Alzheimer educator. She's presented at over 25 conferences in the United States, at civic centers, various facilities, Wisconsin, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. She's been a keynote speaker of these in these conferences. And she, besides the book that she has here tonight, she's working on 3 others. Whoa. So she's a busy lady. So let you get to the speaker tonight, Patti Kerr.
Thank you.
Patti.
Thank you, Jerry, Leslie, and most of all, thank all of you for being here tonight. We're going to start out tonight. I gave all of you a quiz, and I start out with that just so we can get an overview on how this disease is impacting us today in this world. So I'll give you the answers. Feel free to fill them in. Number 1, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death across all age groups. Those 65 and older, it is the 5th leading cause of death. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind is this number may actually be conservative, because a lot of times on the death certificate, they put another cause of death, and maybe a second pneumonia or something like that. So we don't really know if this is the accurate number. That's the close we can get right now. Number 2, an estimated 5.2 million people in the US are living with Alzheimer's. Worldwide, the number is 35.6 million. Number 3, every 7 seconds, someone in the world develops Alzheimer's. In the US, it's every 67 seconds, although they're saying by mid-century they expect that number to go down to every 33 seconds, someone will develop the disease. Number 4, 1 in 10 men and 1 in 6 women will develop Alzheimer's. Number 5, almost 30% of Americans have someone in their family with the disease, but almost 50% of Americans say they know someone. And again, by mid-century, they're saying all of us will either know someone with the disease, be caring for someone, or have the disease ourselves. Number 6, the answer is no. Unlike the top 10 causes of death in this country, Alzheimer's is the only one that cannot be prevented or doesn't have a cure. Keep looking at this, because when I spoke this afternoon, I changed some of these and I started giving the answers, and people are like, well, wait a second, nothing's matching up. So that's why I'm sorry I keep referring back and forth. I want to make sure. Number 7, the answer is 500,000 lives could be saved if we found a cure for Alzheimer's. Number 8, the answer is families. Particularly in the early to mid stages, 80% of the care is provided at home by family members. They say if you took all those caregivers and put them together in one state, it would be the 5th largest state in the nation. Okay, so that'll give you an idea of how many there are. Number 9, women are at the epicenter of the Alzheimer's epidemic. 2/3 of Americans impacted by Alzheimer's are women. Women in their 60s, which that's women of my age, are 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's as they are breast cancer. Okay, our risk for Alzheimer's is 1 in 6, breast cancer it's 1 in 11. The other thing we need to consider is it's not just getting the disease. The majority of Alzheimer's caregivers are women, and not always by choice. A lot of women become caregivers because they're the only female in their family. They say there's nobody else to do it. So we're really becoming a world where we have a generation of women who are simultaneously caring for their family as well as their elders. This woman's name is Kathleen Casey Kirschling, and if you guessed that she was a baby boomer, you would have been right. On New Year's Eve 2011, while the rest of us were toasting in the new year, she became the first baby boomer to turn 65. And 65 is kind of a kickoff age because every 5 years after 65, your chance of getting Alzheimer's doubles. So that's kind of an age that we look at quite a bit. She actually triggered what many are calling the silver tsunami because of the next question. Because baby boomers are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 a day. And by 2050, it's estimated as many as 16 million Americans will be living with Alzheimer's. And worldwide, it's expected to be 115 million individuals. So, I always kind of hate starting that because I always feel like the Grim Reaper. But I just want everybody to know this is the reality of this disease in our world today. Again, if you have cell phones, if you're a caregiver, I never ask anybody to shut their cell phone off because I know it's important you stay connected with your family. But if you can just turn them on vibrate, silence, whatever you need to do, and we'll get started. Our journey, my family's journey with Alzheimer's began with my grandmother. Okay, this is Catherine Witok Sahadak, who was born in Kiev in Ukraine. When she was a very young girl, she decided she was going to hop on a boat and come across the ocean for the opportunity to be in America. This handsome man next to her, that's Hanat Sahadak, who had a crush on Catherine. So he said, well, if she's getting on the boat, I'm getting on the boat too. They came over here, landed in New York, settled in New York for a while, and eventually moved the family out to Hunterdon County, which is rural farming area in New Jersey, which, believe it or not, there really is. They had 6 children and settled there. My grandfather died fairly early. He died when he was 59 of stomach cancer. And my grandmother was devastated. Gratefully, again, she had the 6 children. We all still lived in the town, so we all stayed connected. In the early 70s, my grandmother started getting more and more forgetful. And my mother took her to the doctor, and the doctor said it's just a normal part of aging. Sent her back home. So over time, her memory got worse, her behavior started getting a little bit bizarre, and my mother took her back. And he said, well, what she has, at that time they called it hardening of the arteries in her brain. And they said there's nothing we can do except treat the symptoms. So as the symptoms would surface, they would give my mother a medication for the sleeplessness or the agitation or whatever she was seeing. Now the whole family got together, and because there were 6 of them, they all decided we're going to take care of Mom at home. And that worked for a while until, again, the symptoms worsened. And then one by one, they started stepping out of the picture until it was only my mother. Now my mother was married. My mother had a family. She had my brother and I. She had a house. She had my father. And she had a full-time job. And she was trying to take care of my grandmother too. Well, what ended up happening is one night, my father called my mother, and my mother was crying. And she said, Joe, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, why? What happened? And by this time, my mother had an arsenal of pharmaceuticals to try to deal with the symptoms. My grandmother at that point was going through, and some of you probably know about this, she was going through sundowning. What that is later in the day when the sun goes down, their behavior can worsen. My grandmother had an extreme case of it where she would literally go days without sleeping, which meant my mother was going days without sleeping. And what she said to my father is, I don't remember when I gave Mom her last round of medication. So what she knew is if she'd skipped a dose, her symptoms could worsen. If she'd given her a dose, she ran the risk of over-medicating her own mother. And she said, I don't know what to do. And my dad said, I do. We're calling a family meeting. The next morning he called the family together and he said, this is what's happening, what are we gonna do? And they said, we're gonna sell the house and we're gonna put her into a care facility. Now my mother had made her mother the promise, I will always take care of you, I will never put you into a care facility. So I honestly don't believe my mother ever forgave herself or forgot that she didn't keep that promise to her mother. So my grandmother passed the year before the Alzheimer's Association actually was formed in the early 1980s. And in the coming years, my mother would see things in the paper about this disease called Alzheimer's, and she would cut them out and give them to me and say, you know, I really think this is what your grandmother had. And, you know, life kind of got back to normal after a couple years, and you go on and you just pray we never have to go through that again. But in fact, in 2000, my mother began exhibiting the symptoms. Now, My father and mother, having seen what it did to my mother to put my mother in a care facility, had made the promise to one another. If we ever get sick, we're always going to take care of one another. So that's how it played out. I ended up ultimately quitting my job and helping my father take care of my mother until she passed in December 2007. About a year after my mother passed, I always wrote. I always kept journals when I was a young girl, and I always would write if I got frustrated, if I was happy, no matter. I would write on any piece of paper that was handy. And on the 1-year anniversary of my mother's death, I started looking at all these scraps of paper, and I thought, maybe there's a way we can pay this forward since we've been down this road twice. So I started writing, and then I stopped, because there's a saying that if you've met one person with Alzheimer's or dementia, you've met one person with Alzheimer's and dementia. It can manifest in so many ways that, yes, we'd been down it twice, but it really wasn't enough, I didn't think, to help other people. So I stopped writing for the next 18 months, and I interviewed over 100 other family caregivers and professional caregivers, and ended up publishing this book. Which is, I say, a roadmap to guide you. It takes you from initial diagnosis to the end of the journey. And I tell people, I basically wrote the book I wished I'd had on my nightstand during all the years. Because any of us who are parents knows that the kids always get their earaches in the middle of the night when there's nobody around. And it's the same with this. I wanted the book that somebody could reach for and say, okay, maybe I can try this, maybe I can do that. You're going to hear me use the word journey a lot, and I really do consider this a journey. Someone with Alzheimer's, typically from diagnosis to the end, is about 4 to 8 years, but there are people who have lived 15 years or longer with this disease. So it's a journey. It's a journey for both of you, not only the person with the disease, but the person caring for them. And what I do is I ask the caregivers, if your best friend came to you today and said, my mother, father, husband, whatever, got diagnosed, what would you tell them are the first 4 things they should do? The first thing they said is get a diagnosis and the right doctor. There are other diseases and things that can happen to an individual whose symptoms mimic Alzheimer's. There are treatable things that mimic Alzheimer's. It's important that you know what you're dealing with, that you don't just assume mom's getting forgetful or so-and-so is getting forgetful. It must be Alzheimer's and self-diagnose. Make sure you know what you're dealing with. To do that, you really need the right doctor. Whether it's a gerontologist, a neurologist, it may be a team of doctors to make sure you get the proper diagnosis and get someone that you're comfortable with and that you trust, because they really are going to be your care partner in the coming years too. Next is get your family together, which a lot of people say can be one of the most difficult things to do. Alzheimer's is really a disease of acceptance, not just by the person who's been diagnosed, but by those of us who love them. And it doesn't mean everybody accepts the diagnosis at the same time. So trying to get your family together and accept the diagnosis and put a plan together can be very difficult, but extremely important. Get your legal and financial house in order. I have a whole list of legal documents that you need to have in place, for their medical care, for their finances. Again, what happens if your loved one lives 20 years? How are you going to finance that? What is your care plan going to look like? And how are you going to evaluate it? And what are you going to do going forward? So you need to get the family hopefully on the same page and start figuring out what you're going to do and get support. Number 1 rule of caregiving is to take care of yourself first. If something happens to you, the whole thing falls apart. You've got a wonderful Alzheimer's Association here. They have support groups. Alzheimer's Association itself has a 24/7 hotline you can call any time of the day or night to get help. Lots of online groups. If any of you are on Facebook, you can Google. There's a ton of different online where people are constantly saying, this happened, what did you do? So there's a lot of ways to get support. Now I'm going to tell you how our family played this out, okay? I started seeing symptoms, started saying something to my father. He said, no, I think your mother's fine, don't worry about it. So I wrote a letter to my mother's doctor and said, I know with HIPAA laws and all that, you really can't talk to me, but this is what I'm seeing, and it's increasing in frequency. So next time she comes in, my mother was very social. She was a real extrovert. She could really cover things quite well. And I said, I just want you to know, I know she's coming in and she's joking and she's teasing and you're seeing her maybe 15 minutes every 6 months. This is what I'm seeing between those appointments. He called her in, did a mini cognitive and said, yeah, your mother is in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. Gave her samples of Aricept. My dad brought her home. I was there. She walked in, went straight to the bathroom, flushed the Aricept down the toilet, came out and said, there is nothing wrong with my brain, and when there is, I'll tell you. And I looked at my mom, stormed into the other room, and I said to my dad, what are we going to do? He said, we're not going to do anything. I said, we're not going to talk about this? He said, no, if your mother knows, she knows what happened to her mother. If she knows, it'll kill her. So we didn't talk about it. So that took care of these two. Okay, the other thing is getting your family together. I knew about the promise. My brother is 6 years older than me. I knew he wasn't going to stop working, which meant I'm the girl in the family. I'm going to be the one that's going to end up taking care of my mother with my father. I went from full-time work to part-time work and ultimately stopped working and never stopped to consider how that was going to impact me on a really financial basis. I thought, I'm just going to do this and it's the right thing to do. I'll figure it out down the road. Basically, without going into too many details, it was interesting when it was all over and I'd gone through my savings and I tried to get a job and explain to people what I'd been doing for 7 years, that they would say to me, you know, we really think what you did was a wonderful thing, but it doesn't translate into anything we can use here. So again, make sure you have a plan in place, not just for your loved one, but for you as well. And get support. I had a friend, mother had Alzheimer's, invited me every month to the Alzheimer's support group every month. I said, you're out of your mind. I do this 24/7. If you think the couple hours I have to sit and read a book, I'm gonna instead go talk about Alzheimer's, you're crazy. Didn't go. You'll hear later on when I finally did decide to go, it made a huge difference in our journey. Because as much as your friends and extended family love you and love whoever you're caring for, unless they've done what you're doing, they have no idea what you're going through. You need to be with people who understand the disease and who know what you're going through. I included a chapter for grandchildren, not only because I was both a grandchild and a child of someone with Alzheimer's, but also I was a single mother of twin sons. And my mother and father, well, my father still lives down the street from me, 5 houses away, they helped me raise my boys. So my boys were like this with my parents. When this disease started impacting them and she started forgetting them, you better believe that had a huge impact on them. And actually the only time they ever talked to me about it was when they wrote about it for my book. That's the only time they've ever talked about it. And it was interesting to see what they wrote in the book. But I interviewed grandchildren, and what they talk about is how the disease impacted them. There are children of different ages, but also they give tips for other grandchildren. You know, things they can do with their grandparent before they lose their memory. Things they would want other grandchildren to know. And the other thing I need you to understand is you're looking at the age difference there. We are seeing more incidents of early onset Alzheimer's in this country. And when you talk about talking to children, we're talking about here specifically grandchildren. And people are often afraid to talk to grandchildren about it, but children are extremely perceptive. If they walk into a room and everybody's huddled together whispering, and when they walk in, you stop talking, you better believe they're going to think it's got something to do with them. They don't understand what the disease is, they could think that they can catch it. Okay, so again, what's age appropriate? You really need to talk to children. Going back to the early onset, again, we're seeing young children who are being impacted because their parents are being diagnosed with this disease. I shared with the group this afternoon, I went a couple of years ago, every year they have a forum in Washington, D.C., where people from around the country, Alzheimer's Association, staff, volunteers, and families impacted by it get together in Washington, and we go and talk to our legislators and try to tell them, look, this is the reality, and try to get some money behind research and all that. Anyway, I got to the hotel, my room wasn't ready, I sat and started talking to a young woman, and based on how old she looked, I thought she was probably caring for, you know, a parent or whatever. And she said to me, no, she said, actually, I quit my job yesterday. And she said, I'm gonna start taking care of my husband, who is 32 years old. And she said, honestly, I don't know how we're gonna make it financially, but I know it's what I need to do. And she said he's 32, he got diagnosed 2 years ago, we have 3 small children. And she said every morning when we get up, the first thing our 6-year-old does, he runs in the bedroom, looks at his father and said, "Daddy, do you remember who I am today?" So we need to remember that based on ages, okay, this is impacting lots of generations. I asked caregivers 5 questions. I said, looking back on your journey, what do you believe you and your family did right? What would you have done differently? How long or how have you been changed by your experience? What do you wish you'd known about loving and caring for someone with Alzheimer's? And what would you want others to know about loving and caring for someone with Alzheimer's? One of the key things I want to focus on here is what would you have done differently? I didn't ask them what did you do wrong. Okay, again, we need to remember that this is a journey. Any of you who are caring for someone right now, you're doing the best you can based on the information you have in this moment. It's a long journey. As you learn to do things differently, you'll do things differently. But a ton of bravery and courage in here because they really had to do some soul searching and look at, okay, what would I have done differently? Where is your focus? I have a friend whose mother and father have both had Alzheimer's. At the time that this particular conversation came up, just her father had Alzheimer's. And I was at their house, and we were sitting in this beautiful room. Outside there was this big, beautiful bush that was blooming, and it was teeming with bees. And her father was sitting there looking at them, and the mother, who was the one who didn't have Alzheimer's, was frantic. "Look at all the bees, Michael. How are we going to go outside? Look at all the bees, look at all the bees." And the father, who has Alzheimer's, stopped and looked at her and said, "And look at the beautiful butterfly." So it's kind of the same for us. We need to think in any given moment, what are we going to focus on? Are we going to focus on being gentle and kind to ourselves? As caregivers, we often set the bar extraordinarily high for ourselves, and we're our own worst critic. We focus on what we don't do rather than acknowledging all the things we do. And then also I encourage caregivers to focus on the blessings of the day. And a lot of people say to me, I go into this in more depth in the book, they'll say, "Well, how do you find blessings in a day with this?" And I tell them, put a piece of paper on your nightstand, and every night before you go to bed or before you get up in the morning, write down at least one good thing that happened. And I said, do that for 30 days and see what happens. Because after 30 days, what you're going to find, you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to start looking for something that you can write down on that pad at night. So it's just a little shift in your thinking. Again, deliberate shift in your thinking. This was probably my favorite chapter to write, Joy in Your Journey. And people always say to me, "I can't believe you would even use joy in the same sentence as the word Alzheimer's." And I said, you really can find moments of joy, but we need to do this. We need to shift our thinking, accept they're not doing any of this on purpose. Acknowledge they're doing the best they can, and adjust your expectations. I'm going to pause here for a second and just kind of very quickly go through how this disease can impact an individual's brains. Because a lot of people, and myself included, believe it's just a memory problem. When my mother was diagnosed, I knew my mother is a strong force of nature. And I thought when she got diagnosed, I thought, well, so when she forgets stuff, I'll remind her. If she forgets where the keys are, I'll remind her. I was absolutely convinced, knowing the woman my mother was, that she would never take the same journey my grandmother did. I was firmly convinced, knowing the relationship I had with my mother, that she would make it to the end of the journey knowing who I was. But the title of my book, I Love You, Who Are You, is based on the day my mother looked me in the eyes and said to me, "I love you, but who are you?" So that didn't quite happen. But again, I didn't know anything about the disease. I didn't understand what was happening. So real quick overview. We have the frontal lobe of our brain. Okay, this is our executive control center. This is what allows you to be who you are. It allows you to stop and start things. It controls impulses. Deep in there, there's an impulse center. So when we have the ability, we get a thought or we want to do something, there's something that stops that impulse center and goes, no, maybe you need to stop and think about this. Okay, with this disease, as it starts taking away parts of that, those impulses start leaking through. And things they may have not said or done before, you may start seeing happen. You have, on either side, you have your temporal lobes. Okay, on the left side, that's more impacted, and 98% of Alzheimer's, that's the side that's more impacted. Your left side, and an easy way for you to remember is the left side is language, and they lose that. Okay, so lots of L's. Left side language, they lose it. Okay, that's where you can formulate words. The right side, you retain it, rhythm. Okay, so music, rhythm, dancing, singing, all that kind of stuff, they retain. That's also the side that has chit-chat. That's why I said, later on, my mother was able to chit-chat and say different things. Unfortunately, that's also the part of the brain that has what another educator calls ugly words. Your swear words, your sexually inappropriate things, your racial slurs. So you need to remember this person who maybe impulses are being impacted, they don't have the language they used to have. Things are going to start coming out that you may have this little tiny grandmother who was always this sweet little lady, all of a sudden cursing like a sailor. Okay, we need to remember that it's the disease, it's not her. Okay, if you take your fingers up to your temple 3/4 of the way and you go in 3/4 inches, that's where your hippocampus is. You hear a lot in this disease about the hippocampus. A lot of new memories are stored there. That's why a lot of people talk about, she doesn't remember anything that happened 15 minutes ago, but she remembers, what she ate at lunch when she was in kindergarten. Okay, a lot of new memories stored here. One thing I can tell you is that new emotions, they will hold on to them. So if you make an emotional impact on them, they will remember whether or not they like you. They may not know why, but their emotions can still be impacted. Live in and cherish the moment. Okay, a lot of times we get up in the morning with a long to-do list of things we're going to do, and we're not focused on what we're doing in that moment. With someone with Alzheimer's, again, we can't focus on having a great week or a month or a day. It's really, you need to focus on having a wonderful moment. Robin Williams, who I think is just a legend. He really, really was. I saw him interviewed years ago, and he's now everything's come out about the struggles he had. But I saw this interview many years ago, and the interviewer said to him, "How are you doing?" He said, "I'm doing pretty well." And they said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, because I made one change. I stopped living at the speed of light, and I'm living at the speed of life." That's what you need to do with someone with Alzheimer's. Okay, they are very focused. They will be your biggest teacher in living in the moment. The other thing, again, because this is a progressive disease, you're going to have change. And what I tell people is not all the change is necessarily a bad thing. There were a lot of caregivers in my book who talked about things they learned about their parent because of Alzheimer's. Long-held secrets, or they got a new understanding of the loved one. And the best way, I'm going to read actually from my book so that you kind of get an idea. And this was a caregiver named Chris. "I never wanted to be in the same room as my mother-in-law because she was always so bitter. But through her journey with Alzheimer's, I watched her change and become a nicer person. Even though she no longer recognized me or anybody else in her life, she smiled at us. Gone was the harsh look on her face. Gone was the sarcasm, the bitterness, the venom, the chiseled look of years of self-induced misery, hatred, and holding grudges. She forgot the reasons why she hated people. She forgot about her difficult childhood, the rejection she'd experienced, and the people who hurt her. Instead, she experienced each day anew. She said please and thank you. She smiled, she sang, she laughed. She said I love you, and she meant it. It was pure and from her heart. There were no ulterior motives. Alzheimer's brought peace and comfort to a truly wounded soul. Closely guarded secrets she'd held inside for so long innocently came out because of Alzheimer's. I learned she'd been molested as a child and had an intense fear of abandonment. I realized there were reasons for her bitterness and that it was simply a defense mechanism. She was simply trying to protect herself from ever being hurt again. As my mother-in-law changed, so did I. I learned to love her and also developed a compassion for her, which I'd never had before. I finally understood that her difficult childhood had clouded her adult life. I finally understood the hostility in her and what that hostility had done to my husband during his childhood. Through the things I've been shown on this journey, I found joy and understanding, and through that understanding, I learned to forgive. I've also found peace in my relationship with my husband. So, food for thought, not all change is always a bad thing. This is probably one of my favorite pictures of my mother. To give you a little time reference on this, she was at my grandmother's house getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. That's my mother. On the right is my father, who just turned 91 in March. In the middle is my brother, who is retired and is 66 years old. So that'll give you a time frame. The quote, "Laughter will follow me wherever I go," that was the quote that is underneath my mother's picture in her high school yearbook. And if you knew my mother, that summarizes her. She was a pip. She loved playing practical jokes on people. She was just full of energy and full of life. And when you look at all of the ways laughter can help us on so many levels, King Solomon really had it right that a cheerful heart really is good medicine. The other thing with laughter is it stimulates both sides of the brain. So it makes us more alert and also more open to learning. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of this book, Anatomy of an Illness. It was released in 1981 by Norman Cousins, who at that time was the editor of the Saturday Review. And what had happened is he had been diagnosed with, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it was basically a degenerative, very painful, and irreversible spinal disease. And he got together with his doctor and he put together a rather interesting protocol. Part of his therapy was laughter therapy. So what he would do, he shut off the news, stopped reading the newspapers, started watching, say, old Marx Brothers films. Anything that would make him laugh. And what, interestingly enough, happened was he not only got a handle on the pain, he ultimately triumphed over the disease. I think this is probably one of the first books that talks about the mind-body connection. The University of Iowa did a study years ago, and they used people who had Alzheimer's like amnesia. And they did something kind of similar to this. What they did is they showed them clips of TV shows or movies. They showed them two different ones. Ones were funny, like The Bill Cosby Show or America's Funniest Video. Then they would show them another set, say Steel Magnolias or what's that awful, Sophie's Choice. Oh my God. Anyway, that scene still haunts me. Anyway, they would show them these, and then what they found is 6 minutes after the clips ended, they had no idea what they'd just seen. However, 30 minutes after it ended, they were still impacted on an emotional level. And the other thing that was interesting is the more mentally memory impaired they were, the deeper they were impacted on an emotional level. So we need to remember that even if our loved ones don't understand what we're laughing about or don't understand the joke, if you're in that room and you're calm and you're laughing, a lot of times they're going to mirror that emotion. Okay, so it's okay for you to laugh. A couple months before my book came out, I got a call. It was around 9:30 at night, which you're all welcome to contact me, but not at 9:30 at night. 8:30, I'm done. I'm in bed reading, and the heck with it. But I have old rotary phones in my house with no answering machine, so I know the phone's going to keep ringing. So 9:30 one night, I get this, phone keeps ringing. I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to go get it. So I go and I answer the phone, and there's this gentleman's voice I've never heard before going, "Is Patti Kerr there?" And my first instinct is, we should have let the phone keep ringing. And I said, "This is Patti," and he said, "This is Patch Adams," and it was. It was the original Patch Adams. And if you all know about him, Robin Williams did a beautiful job of portraying him. He's got the Gesundheit Institute, professional clown, all that kind of stuff. But we had a really interesting talk about Alzheimer's and about the importance of laughter. And he said to me, at that point, I was focused on, I was months away from my book finally getting printed and getting out there. And he said to me, so what are you going to do when you're out there talking to people? And I said, I'm not going to be out there talking to people. And he said, oh, yes, you are. He said, we need you out there talking to people. And he said, but what I want you to tell these people when you start talking about laughter, if they seem resistant, you need to tell them that they have doctor's orders from Dr. Patch Adams that they have to laugh. So there you have it.
Patty,
Yes,
when did your book come out?
November 2010.
Oh,
The Journey of What Ifs. Again, going back to my friend whose mother and father both had Alzheimer's. She was one of the readers for my book through all its various edits and rewrites and phases. And what I would ask people, read it. Tell me what you would want more information on. What, do you think I was too wordy on? So she really saw and read the book multiple times. And what she said to me is, I just don't know if I'm ready for this. It's all the what ifs that scare me the most. These are just some of the what ifs that can happen with this disease. And what she said to me is, I'd read your book all those times and I really thought wandering is what was going to come up. So we got the house ready. We did everything you suggested. We put the dark mat in front of the door. We got locks. We got this. We got that. The whole family was ready. Took a notice to the police station in case he took off so they would know what they were looking for. Gave everything to the neighbors. We were ready. Well, instead, he started having hallucinations. Okay, so there's no way to really predict. So what I asked the caregivers, if you saw any of these behaviors, what worked and what didn't? What would you tell others, again, what would you recommend? And one of the things that came up over and over again was find the trigger. A lot of behaviors have a trigger. Now again, we need to remember their language centers are under attack. They may not be able to tell you, so you've got to play detective and you've got to try to figure out, okay, what's triggering this? What's the possible trigger? So you need to rule out any underlying condition, medical condition. Okay, it could be something as simple as dehydration can really wreak havoc on their memory. It could be a urinary tract infection can really mess with them. So it can be a lot of different things. Drug reaction or interaction. Has their physician changed medications? Has another physician introduced a medication? Are you having an interaction between drugs? Environment. Are you in a new place that they've never been and they're uncomfortable? Or are you in a familiar place but suddenly a lot of people came and it got very noisy? Did the lights suddenly get low and they can't see as well? Or is it too bright in there? So you need to look at the environment they're in. Tired, overtired, fatigued. Were they in, say, an adult center during the day and then on the way home you decided to do shopping and then you went to pick the kids up and maybe you stopped one other place and they are just plain exhausted? Or are they bored? Have they been home alone all day with nothing to do, nobody to talk to, nothing to stimulate them? So you need to look at possibly what some of the triggers are. We'll talk about that a little more too. Communication tips. Again, as the disease progresses, we need to learn how to communicate with them. And before we get into these, what I need you to know is we all have kind of boundaries, our comfort zones around us. Okay, we have our intimate zone, which is where, close family friends will give us a hug or give us a kiss or whatever like that. That's our intimate zone. Outside of that, go out about 6 feet. Most Americans have what's called a private zone. Okay. Beyond that is the public zone. That's like where, things can happen out there in the world and it doesn't really impact us too much. You need to keep that in mind only because as you're approaching someone with Alzheimer's, once you're in that 6 foot range, again, this culturally can change depending on, in other cultures, they may have been raised differently too. So again, adjust it. But typically in America, it's a six foot range. So what you want to do is when you are entering that 6 foot range, we're going to do verbal, visual, and then touch. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to verbally say their name. Your name is?
Diane.
Okay, so you would walk into the room and the first thing, once I'm within 6 feet, hi Diane, and then I would wave or make some sort of hand signal to get her to look at me. Okay, the first thing you want to do is make eye contact. You want to make sure that you have their attention and focus on you. You want them to see eye to eye. What I mean by that is she's sitting down. Okay, I'm a short woman, I'm still seeing eye to eye, but beyond that, if I was taller, you don't want to be standing hovering over somebody because it can intimidate them, it can frighten them, and they're not going to listen to what you're saying if they're coming from a place of fear. Speak calmly and slowly. I'm a Jersey girl, I talk very fast, okay? But again, remember, their language centers are under attack. They usually recommend you speak at 1/2 your normal speaking speed, and you take a breath between sentences. Short sentences, and I'll show an example of this in a second. One thought or question at a time. Wait, listen, and watch. And what I mean by that is give them time to catch up to what you're saying. Say something and then just wait. Give them a chance to try to formulate an answer and then listen to what they say. If what they say isn't making sense, watch their body language or something may be doing. You may be able to get a good clue by something that they're saying or doing. Don't say remember. Chances are they don't remember, and they know they don't remember, and it can upset them, embarrass them, insult them, okay? Don't say remember. Don't argue or correct them. You will never win an argument with someone with Alzheimer's. End of story, okay? If my mother said the sky was pink, and so be it. Don't react or distract, or don't react but distract. Any of you with young children, grandchildren, you know that when they're heading for the electrical outlet, you're gonna find a way to distract them. Same thing here, you wanna distract them. Give compliments. Again, by me telling Maggie she has an amazing smile, took very little time, cost me not a cent, okay? Everybody wants to feel valued and needed. So remember to give compliments. That's a beautiful shirt you have on. Oh, that shirt makes your eyes look so beautiful. Your hair looks so pretty today. You know, anything making them still feel valued and appreciated. Ask their opinion. Be prepared for the truth because they're probably going to give you the truth and it may not always be kind. But it can be simple things. You know, if your loved one is in a care facility, bring in, 2 outfits and say, I have a big meeting tomorrow. Which one do you think I should wear? Ask their opinion on things. Don't talk about a person in his or her presence. My father was my biggest teacher in this. Because we cared for my mother at home, people would come to visit them in the home. Because my mother was nonverbal or non-participating, they thought it was a free-for-all. We can just talk about her in front of her. And my father would very quietly get up and walk into the other room. And after a couple seconds, he would come back in and he would say, my wife is still here. Please do not talk as if she's not. So he was a wonderful teacher for me in that. Just because they may not be participating, don't assume that they don't know what's going on. Okay, so don't talk about them in their presence. Use their life story. What I tell people is you really need to look at the whole person. You need to look at who they were. My mother, this is all about Penny. That was my mother's nickname. You can make up a set of these cards. If you're caring for them at home, throw them on the coffee table. Okay? They're conversation starters. Somebody can come and flip through here and find out something about my mother that maybe they didn't know, and they can talk with her. If they're in a care facility, a lot of places have like a form where they'll have you fill things out, but still might be good to fill these out. Again, I don't recommend buying a stack of 4,000 index cards with a 16-inch ring. Do 15 or 20 and mix them up every once in a while so there's new things for them to learn about your loved one. So one of the things was red is Penny's favorite color. Okay, if my mother had been in a care facility and she constantly went into her roommate's closet to steal her red clothing, we would have had an indication why. Okay, she's drawn to anything red. Penny loves to garden. She had a big vegetable garden every year and canned the tomatoes. Some places now have actually a garden room where they can go and dig. If you have someone at home, I'm not saying you have to send them out, to mulch the garden or weed or anything like that, but you can get a small flower pot and let them dig in it and do something that they love doing, or let them go out and work alongside you. Penny doesn't drink coffee, she drinks tea with milk and sugar. The reason I do this is because there's a very different feeling, me walking into a room and asking, what would you like this morning? Would you like coffee, decaf, regular? How do you take it? Milk, cream, sugar? How much sugar? Okay? Very different feel than me walking in and saying, here's your tea with milk and sugar just the way you like it. Okay, by doing that, by learning that simple thing, when they walk into the room, this person goes, wait a second. Here's somebody who knows me and knows what I like and took the time to get me what I like. Okay, so it's just little things that are going to help you connect with them. Penny is afraid of dogs. This was kind of interesting because my mother grew up on a farm and they had dogs all the time. Later on, petrified of dogs. And we were never allowed to have dogs. I was allowed to have a rooster as a pet, but never a dog. But she was afraid of dogs. A lot of places now bring pets in, pet therapy, which is wonderful. Wouldn't have been so wonderful for my mom. If there was a pet or a dog there, they would have wanted to know that she was afraid and to shut her door while the dog was there, and certainly not bring the dog into her room. The other thing is, if they know what kind of pet the person liked, I'm going to talk in a second about vision. And they may not be able to tell the difference between a live pet and a stuffed pet. The other thing you can do is, I did this when I spoke out in Wisconsin. I went to a place and I spent, half a day just hanging out with the people in the facility, and all this woman kept talking to me about was her cat. I miss my cat, I miss my cat, I miss my cat. So before I left that town, I went to a local Walmart and they had little stuffed cats that looked so real. I bought her one and I came back in and I didn't say anything, I just put it on her lap. And they said from then on, in the afternoons when she was normally getting agitated, they would bring her her cat and helped calm her down. Okay, so there's a lot of different things, just knowing about the person, things you can do. Penny's real name is Stephanie. Some family called her Stella, but most called her by her nickname, which was Penny. This would have been important again because as the disease progressed, my mother would lay in bed and go, Stella, 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 Stella. We were caring for her at home. We knew who she was talking about. But if she was in a care facility, the paperwork would have showed Stephanie. They would have probably called her Penny because that was her nickname, and they would have wondered who Stella was. Okay, by knowing something like this, they understand she's still talking about herself. Penny loves music, especially polkas and country western. Okay, again, remember that right side of the brain is rhythm. It's music. You can use music all the way up until the end. With my mother, if she was having a bad day, we knew if it was a really bad day, it would take a couple songs. But usually by about the third or fourth song, my mother would have calmed down and a lot of times would be dancing around the room. Okay, music really can soothe the savage beast. Penny loves to dance. Again, she loved country western music. On Saturday nights, we have a local radio station that does something called the Hunterdon Hayride. And they broadcast from a local fire station, and it's all country western music, and they have live musicians. And I said to my dad, I think we should start taking her. They did it years ago, and I said, what's the worst that can happen? So we would take her, and she loved it. She loved the music, and she would get up and dance the entire night, would dance the circumference of the room. And my father, I think initially was embarrassed. What are people going to think? And she's out there dancing. And the interesting thing, we never said anything to anybody, that my mother had Alzheimer's. But people would come up to us afterwards and say, I love when your mother's here. I wish I was as uninhibited as your mother was and could get up and dance. So don't assume that it's something they can't do. Give it a shot. Penny loves chocolate. She doesn't like vegetables and has never eaten pizza or fish. My mother was a brilliant cook. Like I said, she had a garden. She canned her own tomatoes, made her own spaghetti sauce, but left this world never once eating spaghetti, never having a slice of pizza, never ate fish, never ate most vegetables. Fruits she could get, sweet corn she would eat, anything chocolate, she would gobble it down, which helped us later in the disease when it became difficult for her to swallow. We were able to get the nutritional drinks in her because they were chocolate. So she would inhale those. So again, things like this, just simple things. Again, these can change. When you talk about diet, there was a woman who filled out the forms for a place and said, my mother hates anything with cheese, won't drink iced tea. And they said, okay, they made a note on the paperwork. She said 2 or 3 weeks later, she walked in and there's her mother in the room eating a pimento cheese sandwich and drinking a glass of iced tea. So again, as things change, you can change these cards up. And know that at any point things could change. I want to talk for a couple minutes about how this disease can impact vision, because that's something else we need to take into consideration. When we're born, we have a huge field of vision. Okay, as we age, that field of vision gets smaller and smaller. Okay, with Alzheimer's, it gets even smaller. Okay, we have central vision, which is where we can really focus on something, and then we've got the peripheral vision. For someone with Alzheimer's, sometimes this is way too much for them to try to process. So they decide we're going to focus on central vision, okay, which brings their range of vision down to about 12 inches. What we call this is binocular vision. So I just want everybody here just to go like this. Okay, that will give you an idea of their range of vision and how much you can see. Now sometimes even this is too much stimulus for someone with Alzheimer's, and their brain may decide that's too much, and they'll shut down one eye and they'll only be getting, so I want you to do this. This is called monocular vision. Okay, the reason I'm telling you this is, again, going back to how to approach someone with this disease from the front, making sure you're getting their attention. They're probably not going to be able to tell you, this is all I can see. You've got to, again, be detective. So you have to assume this is what they can see and adjust what you do and how you approach them. A perfect example of this is what I used to do. Again, remember, I didn't know 95% of what's in this book. I learned most of this after my mother passed. So I'm honored to be able to share it with you. But again, what I would typically do when I came into the room, didn't know about approaching from the front. Mom maybe would be sitting in another room in a chair, and I would come in the room already babbling. Hi, Mom, how you doing? The kids, blah, 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 blah. They had a great soccer game, yada, 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 yada. It's a nice day, but you know what? I think you haven't had a bath in a couple days. How about the first thing we do is we get a bath? And by this time, I'm in front of her. Now, based on which of her eyes is working, she still may not see me. And if the first thing I'm doing is going and reaching to start undo her blouse, what do you think she's going to do? She's going to swat me away. Now, for those who work in care facilities, we need to take that into consideration. If you're not in their range of vision and you're approaching them and the first thing you're going is for their button, if I started undressing him, I guarantee he's going to swat my hand away, and rightly so. Okay, another thing that I used to do is I would come in the room, and I like to talk, if you can't tell. Mom, it's a beautiful day out today, so you know what I think we're going to do? I think maybe what we're going to do, we'll have breakfast. But before we have breakfast, you know what I want you to do? Go to your closet, pick out a couple clothes, get dressed. I'll go start breakfast, and then we'll go for a walk. And then I would go away, fully expecting my mother to go to her closet, get dressed, and meet me in the kitchen. The last thing my mother heard me say was, and then we're going to go for a walk. 9 times out of 10, that's what she would remember, and she would get up and start walking for the door because that's what she remembered. We're going for a walk. She didn't remember all the other things that I told her about. So again, it goes back to those short sentences. Again, and going back to the field of vision, you can use that to your benefit as a caregiver too. Sometimes if you're in a care facility, you may see someone sitting in a chair and there's a fan going and there's maybe a pull down thing, and they'll be going like this, thinking that they can reach it to shut it off. If you have a rug with a dark border and they go to walk over it, you may see them going like this, or they won't cross over it because their mind may perceive that as a hole. Now what you can do if you have someone who potentially could wander, you get a dark mat and put it in front of the doors, because their mind may perceive that as a hole and they won't wander out. Try it, they might like it. This is one of my favorite pictures of my mother as she neared, this is the summer before she passed away. There was a Ukrainian festival in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I said to my family, we're going. And they said, you're out of your freaking mind. And I said, you know what, we're gonna try it. She might like it. What's the worst that can happen? Now, the first thing I tell people is if you're going to do something like this, be aware of your surroundings. If it's a new place that you've never been before, when you get there, the first thing you're gonna say to whoever you're with, you know what, I need to use the restroom. Can you go with me? Acquaint yourself with where the restroom is, because by the time they tell you they have to use the restroom, chances are it's too late, and you're not gonna want at that point start trying to figure out where the restroom is. So be aware of your surroundings. Again, I dressed us up in our pierogi finery, and off we went. I made sure we got there early in the day because I knew it would be quiet. It started at 9 o'clock. I knew most people would probably start coming around lunchtime. We got out of the car, and the first thing my mother heard was a polka band. So she automatically assumed it was her party. So we got in the door, and the second thing that happened was she smelled pierogis and the stuffed cabbage and the kapusta and all the things that she grew up with. And so another sense was stimulated, and it made her feel like home, brought back happy memories for her. So we walked around, there was no agenda for the day. If she wanted to dance, and mostly what she did is she danced around the room. That was fine, except I tell people, be aware of their actions, reactions, and emotions, and be flexible. Because what happened as time, about an hour and a half after we got there, more and more people started coming. And she didn't know who those people were. And it was getting noisy, and it was getting crowded, and the band maybe took a break for 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, I could see she was getting very agitated and very upset. So we just very quietly, I would have loved to stay longer, but I just very quietly put my arm around her, and we left. We had a great hour and a half together. We made a great memory together. So try it, they might like it. The other thing I tell people too is suggestion. I made up these cards. They're very simple cards. There's templates all over computers, but you can make them yourself. What it said is, this is my mother. She has Alzheimer's. Thank you for your understanding and patience. Because what I found is if I was in a new place, or if we were out at a restaurant and my mother started acting up, everybody started looking, and what is wrong with that woman? Well, for me to leave the table and walk over to them and say, I'm really sorry, but my mother has Alzheimer's. Again, we don't want to talk in front of them. We don't want to embarrass them. Make a supply of cards, carry them in your pocket, and what you're going to find is people fear what they don't understand. Most people don't understand this disease, but if they can put a name to what the behavior is, a lot of times you're going to find people will actually become your adversary, okay, and they will work with you, or not your adversary, your advocate rather than your adversary, and they will work with you to try to calm the situation down. So again, these are just something I made up on the computer. I've had other people who come to my talk said, you know what, I have a grandchild with autism. I'm going to do that with them. Doctor's appointments. We all know how much it takes to just get them in that doctor's office. If it's the first time you've been to a doctor's office and it's a new surrounding and it's taken you 2 hours to get them dressed and convince them to get in the car to go, and then you have to sit another 45 minutes in the waiting room, it's going to be a disaster. Okay, you walk in, she's standing there, you can very quietly hand the card to the woman at the desk and just say, if you could sneak us in quickly, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so just ways to work along with people who maybe don't understand what's going on. When we talk about using their life story too, you can also use that to plan activities for them during the day. If you kind of know a little bit about the person, if you have, say, a gentleman who loved working with his hands, okay, you get a bunch of screws and bolts and you put them together and then you give him a tray. and say, would you do me a favor, can you maybe take these apart and sort them out for me? Get a bunch of PVC pipe and put it together and ask him to, to take it apart. There's a lot of things we can do. My mother liked to cook. She could no longer cook, and she used to get very angry when my father and I took it over. But what we would do is shift her. Okay, Mom, you know what? You set a beautiful table. Can you get the table set? Guarantee it's not going to be set the way you and I would set it, but so be it. Again, we need to give them purpose. We need to give them meaning. So give them things they can do. Basket of laundry in the closet. If you have to use it a couple times a day, chances are they're not going to remember that it's the same laundry. Can you fold this for me, Mom? Can you wipe the counter down after dinner? Just a lot of different things that they can do. I used to ask her all the time to sweep off the back deck. She used to love being out in the fresh air. She swept that deck. That thing was whistle clean. She loved being out there doing it. Think about what their daily rituals were. Did they get up in the morning and read the paper, have a cup of coffee? Take that into consideration. I heard a story once about a woman who family had placed her. She was having a lot of trouble adjusting. And then one day, they handed out a flyer saying that they were going to have afternoon tea. Well, this woman was British and grew up having afternoon tea. And she said to her daughter said to her mom, they're having afternoon tea. Would you like to do this? And she said, absolutely, but I need my hat. So the daughter came in, she had her hat, her mother had her hat, they had afternoon tea. And what they found is the afternoons were typically a very difficult time for this woman. The afternoon tea that day calmed her down. So what this place did is they decided to have afternoon tea every single day and put this woman in charge of it. So every day they would say, Margaret is having afternoon tea, please let her know if you can make it. So people would keep saying to her, Margaret, I'm coming to tea today. She would say, okay. So a couple things happened with that. First of all, she was needed, okay? They looked at who she was. The other thing, if they were having difficulty getting her to bathe, Margaret, you have 15 people coming for tea today. Okay, so again, thinking about what are their rituals, what did they used to do that possibly you can still use. There was another place, and I thought this was brilliant. The daughter just came out one day. There was a picture hanging crooked on the wall. And she said, oh, Mom, look at that picture. And the mother went over and straightened it. And she said to somebody in the place, makes my mother crazy if pictures are hanging crooked on the wall. So they actually had a staff person walk around all day long making the pictures crooked, okay? Gave her purpose, gave her something to do. So again, it's these little things that we need to look at to give them purpose and meaning. When I look back on all the years we spent caring for my mother, my most precious memories were the nights I spent with my dad and my brother and my mother, just holding my mother's hand, watching the birds at the feeder. We're a very task-oriented society. We want to get things done. We want to have plans. We want to do things. Sometimes we need to remember that doing nothing is the most important thing you're going to do with your loved one on that day, just sitting and holding their hand and just being with them. At 211 degrees, we all know water is hot. At 212 degrees, water boils. And with boiling water, we get steam. And with steam, we now have the ability to power a locomotive. So as caregivers, what we need to remember is 1 degree in temperature goes from something that's simply hot to something that can power a locomotive. We need to remember that sometimes it's the really small, seemingly insignificant thing you're going to do that's going to have the biggest impact. So again, my hope is honestly one day I never have to do this because we found a cure and Alzheimer's is a thing of the past. In the meantime, I'm honored to be doing what I'm doing. I hope that today was a little bit of a help for you. I'm going to open it up to questions now because I know I can't cover everything, and if anybody has any questions about anything, my book is here. You're welcome to browse through it. Maggie has put a ton of information out here. Again, I encourage all of you to get educated and get support. And my business card is up here. I do have a Facebook page which is dedicated to Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's caregivers. You're always welcome to email me. I would give you my phone number, but I'd be afraid somebody would call me at 9:30 at night, and I don't want to talk to you then. So, other than that, I just want to thank you all for having me. I hope it was helpful. And does anybody have any questions?
Well, I have a question.
Okay, honey.
I just would like to know, did you have any idea, for example, there is many symptoms, it's not just one. So for a person who you think is normal, maybe what will trigger that visit to the doctor in addition of what you were talking about?
The Alzheimer's Association has a wonderful thing that addresses that. It's called the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. Because people often say, oh, I forgot where I put my keys, I forget a name. Very different type of forgetting. Okay, you and I, if you forget where we put our keys, we can retrace our steps and we can end up eventually recalling a person's name. If you do you have?
They must have taken them at the first
Okay.
one, they must have. But basically, the first sign is the loss of your short-term memory that should set up a red flag. And it's significant enough that it impacts your daily life. So many of us have the situation where I forgot where I put my keys, you walk into the living room and you go, oh, what did I come in here for? And then you go back to the kitchen and you're like, oh yeah, you remember. You're able to kind of walk back and trace your steps. A person with Alzheimer's disease can't do that. There are a number of other things that are also indicative of other disease processes, but the key point is when your short-term memory is impacted significantly enough to alter the way you function in your daily life, you should go and see a doctor. Chances are it's not Alzheimer's disease and it's something that's reversible, and the doctor will help you identify what that is. So there are 10 warning signs. You can look them up at alz.org or you can look them up right here. So very quickly, memory loss that disrupts daily life, challenges in planning or solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks at home, at work, or at leisure, confusion with time or place, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships, new problems with words in speaking or writing, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps, decreased or poor judgment, withdrawal from work or social activities, and changes in mood and personality. Now, some of these things happen to all of us at one point or time in our life, but again, it's important to remember that it impacts your daily life significantly. And it's time to just go to the doctor and find out what's going on. Chances are it's not Alzheimer's disease, and it's something that can be treated, but if it is Alzheimer's disease, it gives you an opportunity to start your planning. So it also gives you the opportunity to start medications that will help manage the symptoms. So it's worth going and finding out what's going on.
And the pamphlet
Thank you for that.
she's reading from is this one up here. It's called
The
Basics of
Basics.
Alzheimer's Disease. It also covers the stages of the disease. Okay, so again, please help yourself to whatever is up here. Any of you who are caring for someone with the disease, I know you have your upcoming Alzheimer's walk. I can't tell you what an impact this had on me the first time I did it. Because really, I kind of felt like we were out there on our own. When you're in a group like that with other people who are doing it and you see the numbers, it's really, really impactful, but you also feel incredibly uplifted and supported because you realize you're not in this alone. So, anything else?
Is this the leading dementia, Alzheimer's? How does it compare to like the Lewy body or?
It is the leading
How
one.
similar is
So
it?
a lot of people, people sometimes ask me, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Okay, dementia is basically a syndrome. It's a set of symptoms. Okay, so if you had a huge tree, we're gonna call the tree dementia. 70 to 80% of the branches on that tree are gonna be Alzheimer's branches. Okay, and then you have the other ones. You'll have frontal temporal, you'll have Lewy body, you'll have, vascular dementia. But 70 to 80% of that are actually Alzheimer's. So people will say to me, well, the doctor said my mother had dementia, but now he changed her diagnosis to Alzheimer's. And I said, well, no, it's the same thing. It's just they're fine-tuning what the diagnosis is, so. Yes?
I understand that people can live with Alzheimer's for quite a while. When they die, I don't understand what is it that Alzheimer's does to cause death.
Okay. The final chapter in my book, actually, it's called The End of the Journey, and it explains a lot of that stuff. But basically what happens is, again, remember this is a progressive disease of the brain that's taking away their ability to do almost everything. In the end stages, it's going to take away their ability to swallow, their desire to eat, to drink, and basically it will start shutting their organs down. Okay, so that's what it is. That's why I'm saying, you know, some people, we were very blessed at the end of the journey. And what ended up happening with us is, again, my father was very resistant to having anybody other than me in the house with my mother. There was a point, and you would read about it in the book, where I needed surgery, and my mother was incontinent. And the doctor said, there is no way you can go back to helping because you're running a risk of getting an infection. So I went to my father and I said, Pop, here's the deal. I need to get this done. I don't want to leave you without help. So I thought, a wonderful woman. She lasted one afternoon. My father complained all she did was drink Coca-Cola, and he fired her. So now I'm looking at my father. Now the thing we need to remember is older adults caring for someone with Alzheimer's have a greater risk of dying before the person they're caring for because of the stress of this disease. So now I'm looking at my mother, who needs to be taken care of, my father, whose ship is sinking, and what choice did I have? Despite the doctor's warnings, I went back to helping my father care for my mother. Things progressed, and September 19th, 2007 was my mother's birthday. I made her favorite chocolate cupcakes. We sang, we danced, she danced around the house, everything was fine. The next day, September 20th, my dad went down into the basement to gather up the recycling, and my mother came down the steps. My dad's hard of hearing, he didn't hear her. And I had literally been with them all day long. I had just left their house, just walked in the front door, and the phone rang, and my dad said, Pat, your mother fell. I need you to get back down here because I think she might have hurt herself. There are only 5 doors down the street. I ran down, and there's my mother, and she's not actually sure what's going on, but she's sitting on the floor. She's bleeding profusely from her chin because she had tripped and hit her chin on the door ledge going into the bathroom downstairs. And I knew anything in the head bled a lot, so I wasn't as concerned about that as I was. She was on the ground, and every time she would go to move, she'd grab her hip. And I said, Pop, we got to get her to the hospital. So ambulance came, picked her up. That was another whole interesting journey. Then you go and you wait in the emergency room for several hours while they take all kind of tests, and she's wanting to know why she's there. She has no idea really that anything's wrong. She just wants to go back home. And then they tell us she has a minor fracture in her pelvis. They're going to keep her overnight. And I said, I would really like to stay with my mother because this is unfamiliar territory. She's going to be fine. She's going to be medicated. Well, we called and called every hour. We would call, and finally they said, she's fine. Call us in the morning. So it's okay. Went back in the morning, and they said, well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to transfer her to a rehab facility. They'll let it heal, and then they're going to teach her how to walk again. I went, okay. So they transfer her to a rehab place. And after a couple days of attempting that, they come to us and say, you know, we're having trouble rehabbing her because, you know, she has Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember what we're teaching her from day to day. And I kind of went, yeah. And so what ended up happening from that, and I don't know the laws in Vermont, don't claim to be any kind of legal expert on what the laws are up there. What ended up happening is my mother was in this facility, and I said to her, we want to bring Mom home. And she said, here's what's going to happen. You and your father are the only ones caring for her, and you're exhausted. If you attempt to take your mother home without getting help in that house, we're bringing you up on adult protected service charges. So now we couldn't even get my mother back home. Now, go back to my friend who invited me every single month to the Alzheimer's group. The month before this happened, in August, I went. The only reason I went was to shut my friend up. We went, at that meeting, the first thing that came out, a woman said, my parent just passed away. We had a brilliant caregiver at the house. If anybody needs anybody. I didn't pay attention because we were fine. Guess what? A month later, we need someone. I called the woman who ran the Alzheimer's group and I said, I need that woman's name and number. And the other thing that had happened is the facility had brought in hospice. They said, we really think you're at the end of your journey, which really got my gander up. I said, there's no way. Because with this disease, you see them rally. And I kept thinking, this is a speed bump. We're not at the end of the journey. We're going to keep going with this. So I completely shut hospice out of our life. And they're angels. They really are. They just said, okay, that's fine. They said, if it's okay, we'd still like to come over when you get her home. And we'd like to, just check on her every day. I'm like, that's fine, you can come over. Well, what ended up happening, the woman came to meet my father and I. And we loved the woman. And I said, but Dad, the connection has to be between her and Mom. So we went to the place, and my mother, again, nonverbal, sitting. They had her tied into a wheelchair so she wouldn't try to get up out of the chair. And my mother looked at my dad and I and looked up at Bernice and went like this with her hands. And Bernice bent down, and my mother took her face in her hands and smiled at her. And I said, interview over. You got the job. Called hospice. Within 48 hours, they got us a medical bed. They got us a commode. They got us everything we needed. I completely took apart my brother's old bedroom. We converted it into a room for my mother. And we didn't tell the facility because they kept saying she was adjusted and we shouldn't think about bringing her home. And I thought, you know what, we're doing this under the gun. And I said to hospice, we're not telling them until the day we're ready to bring her home. Went in the morning and I said, we're taking her home. Hospice has been there. We have a caregiver living in the home. She took over my old bedroom. And they got, transport. And they said, you're going to have trouble. She's really adjusted here. You're going to have trouble because, well, guess what? They brought the medical van. They wheeled my mother in the wheelchair. And she sat there like a queen. And we got home. And she looked at us. And we wheeled her out. And we wheeled her into the house. And she never, ever we never had a moment of problems with her because she knew she was home. So for us, that's what worked for us. Again, hospice was there, so as things progressed, it really was the end. It triggered the end of my mother's journey, but they were there to help us. Because I really think if hospice hadn't been brought in, when my mother stopped trying to eat, I would have tried forcing her to eat. And again, they aspirate and they can end up with pneumonia, which then can be the cause of death on the death certificate. So again, things kind of play out, but there are really angels that are going to come along the way to help you, and that's our story, and I'm sticking with it. So thank you all again for being here. I'm around. Feel free to look at the book, take anything that's up here, and any questions, please just let me know.